Great to see you here today. As you came in, hopefully you got a chance to grab some coffee if you want that. If you didn't see it there, feel free to jump out there and grab some coffee. If you didn't sign in, we'd love for you to sign in. You can just do that on your way out. There's a sign-in sheet on the table by the door. And also, hopefully you got one of these guys, the Life Group Leaders Handbook. Now, how many of you were at the training that we did last fall? Okay, so you remember the handbook from then? It's evolved, hasn't it? It was a 3-page Word document stapled together then. Now it's like 10 pages, it's still stapled together, but it looks more like a book. It's becoming more book-like. And so that's what we're going to be basing our training off of today is out of this Life Group Leaders Handbook. And hopefully this will be a valuable resource to you throughout the semester and throughout signups. And the first thing I'm going to do is point out the very last page. We have an appendix, Appendix A, and that is CCB for Life Group Leaders. That will probably be your friend at some point, especially if you're a new life group leader or newer life group leader, and you're still trying to figure out this crazy thing we keep referring to called CCB. And so that's going to be something that'll help you out. So I just wanted to make sure you knew right off the bat that that was there. So let's go back to the first page. I want to start off today by just talking about why we do life groups in the first place. This is something maybe you've heard before. I've said it before, but it's okay for us to remind ourselves of what this means. So why life groups? Matthew 28:19 says, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." So this passage from Matthew was the final command that Jesus gave his disciples in the Gospels. They were parting words, so to speak. After saying this, he left, and 40 days later, the Holy Spirit came upon the disciples. What happened is quite simple, really. The teacher gave a command to his students, and then he gave them the power to actually do it. That command is to make disciples, and that power is the Holy Spirit. And it seems crazy. God's plan to redeem the world relies on people like you and me teaching others how to obey Jesus. Surely the God of the universe would prefer to accomplish his purposes another way. But that's not the kind of God that he is. He wants us to help others enter a relationship with him and with each other. Once again, that's just the kind of God that he is. God's plan for you and for me is to make disciples. And here's the important part. And there is no plan B. There is no plan B. Jesus said, go into all the world and make disciples. And then what? He was out. He gave us the Holy Spirit. He now sits at the right hand of the Father, ruling over all creation. However, he passed the ball to the church. He said, all right, you guys got this. He even said in the book of John, you guys are going to do greater things than me. What do you think that might have meant? I mean, I don't know about you. I haven't raised many dead people in my life. How is it that we're going to do greater things than him? Well, what he's saying is that us collectively as the church universal, we're actually going to make a greater impact because of what he's done in us than he did in those 3 years that he was ministering on the earth. So he says that you've got this. The ball's in your court. I'm putting it in your hands. I'm sending you the Holy Spirit so that you will be empowered to do this work. There is no plan B. Churches often forget this. We do silly things like turn ourselves into a social club or a members-only community center. We forget that the calling is outward into all nations, and so we become like perfectly good cars that just sit together in a junkyard. We must never become a junkyard church. I'm thankful. I don't think the Ransom is a junkyard church. Okay? I think we're doing quite well in this arena. I think that we're a church that understands we are called outward into the world. But let us never even come close to becoming a junkyard church. Next paragraph. We also may try to pretend that discipleship can be just one of the many things the church does. I think this is important, like evangelism, missions, pastoral care, and worship. We fail to see that discipleship is truly all-encompassing. From before a person ever hears about Jesus to the unending process of seeking unity with the Lord, it's all discipleship. Every program, every budget line, every hire, every decision must serve to advance this one mission: make disciples. That's what Jesus told us to do. He didn't tell us to do anything else. On his way out, he said, make disciples. The degree to which a church deviates from this command to make disciples is the degree to which it has forsaken the command of the master. Put simply, there is nothing else. If we're not making disciples, we are not being the church. So what exactly is a disciple? The word simply means student. A disciple is one who learns. In our case, someone who learns to obey Jesus. But the truth is, most of us are disciples already. The question is, what are we disciples of? There are plenty of things other than Jesus that demand our love today. Our job is to learn to love Jesus above all else. Here's the catch. We often assume with good intentions that in order to fulfill Jesus' command to make disciples, we must build the church. We think that if we build up the church, then more disciples will result. So therefore, our thinking goes, we need more programs, more funding, more volunteers, then we'll be able to make more disciples. But is this the way that Jesus went about things? No. Jesus didn't have a program, let alone funding, right? Jesus didn't start by building a church. He started by making disciples, and only then, at the end of a grueling process of walking with 12 at times frustratingly dense followers, did he establish his church. You see, if you build a church, you don't always get disciples. But if you make disciples, you will always get the church. That is why we do what we do. So as a life group leader, you are central to our aim of staying on mission with Jesus. You are a, quote, lead discipler. We cannot understate how important this is, and so I want to emphasize this. Thank you for your commitment to making disciples. I hope that after that you guys understand just how central you are, not only to what we're trying to accomplish as a ransom, but to what God has called us to in his word. As a life group leader, you're a lead discipler. You're creating a space in your house or in your heart where people can come learn about Jesus. It's a messy process. It doesn't always see results right away. Maybe you'll never see that much results at all. But guess what? That's ministry. Jake's going to get to talk a little bit more about how ministry or about life group leading is kind of like gardening. But it's not a fast process. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So, moving on to the next page, what is a life group? I'm not going to read this to you like I did the last section. I'm going to kind of just talk about it because many of us, if not all of us, have done Roots, and you'll notice that this is kind of comes out of that idea. But it says there in our emboldened definition, at the Ransom, here's how we define life groups. A life group is an intentional community where we learn the practices, principles, and priorities of the Christian faith. So that should sound familiar to you, having done Roots now, because that's kind of what we tried to categorize the things in Roots as. So the practices, what are the things that God calls us to do in order to practice our Christian faith, in order to know God better and to live out his calling? For example, we're called to study the scriptures. We're called to prayer. We're called to worship, okay? So we talked about those practices. And of course, there's many more that we could come up with, but we talked about 4 in Roots. And then what are the things that we're called to believe as Christians, right? We can't just believe anything. There's certain foundational truths that unite all Christians. Things like the fact that God is the creator of all things, that Jesus came in the flesh, that Jesus died for our sins, that he came back to life literally and bodily. Those are some of the things, the principles that we tried to affirm in Roots. And then finally, the priorities. In other words, what kind of life are we seeking to live? A life that exudes faith and justice and mission and holiness. And so that was the last 4 weeks of Roots, and I know some of you, and my group included, are still just wrapping up with another week or so. But my hope is that this gives us a little bit of clarity for what a life group is supposed to do. So now that we're going to a semester where we're doing topical groups, and you're thinking to yourself, man, what should I do for a topical group? You can ask, well, does it do one of these 3 things? Does it help people practice the faith better? For example, Pastor Jason is going to start a prayer group on Tuesday nights, and they're going to learn how to pray. Maybe, you want to do a Bible study. You're going to learn principles. You're going to learn what we believe. Priorities is a cool one. I would love to see more groups devoted to the priorities category. One thing that we've had in the past is we've actually had a group that got together and said, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to do missions. And so they would just go out and serve at a different place every week. And sometimes they would just go out on the street and pray for people. That's sweet. So I would love to see something like that happen again. But what this also does is it helps us see what's not a life group. Hey, I've just really got a passion for underwater basket weaving, and I would just love to teach people in the church how to basket weave underwater. I feel it's a calling. And I can say, that's awesome that you want to pour yourself into people like that and build relationships. I don't really see how it is a practice or a principle or a priority necessarily, but, that's sweet. So it helps us give a little bit of clarity about what we're trying to accomplish in our life groups as well. All right? So flip on over to the next page, page 4. What is a life group leader? And now I'm going to ask Pastor Jake to come on up here. He's going to teach this section, and then I'll be back in a minute. We're going to get to hear from both Jake and I and Pastor Phil at the end today. But I'm assuming that all of you have had some sort of interaction with Jake Thurston. He's sent an email to most of you. He's called many of you, and he's our resident spiritual formation pastor. And he has just been such a dynamite guy to have around. If you don't know this guy, please be sure to get to know him because he's got a lot to offer. And so you're gonna find out in a minute. But I also want to introduce Nate. Nate, will you just stand up real quick? So Nate is coming on, I think, January 9th, and he's going to join us in the spiritual formation team as well as a resident pastor. He's beginning his seminary journey. And so we're really excited to have Nate. So you'll probably get to interact with Nate a little bit as well, although he's going to kind of major in the care team with Jason, but he'll nonetheless have plenty to do with life groups too along the way. So I'm going to turn it over to Jake. Thanks, buddy.
Awesome. Thanks, Cody. That was so emphatic of you. Well, yeah, like Phil said, I don't know everyone here, and I know also a lot of our other life group members aren't, or our other life group leaders aren't able to be here this morning, but I would love to get to know you guys, and even if you want to see me more through emails, we can do that too if you're into that means of communication. But yeah, so we talked a little bit about what a life group is and why we do life groups, but we really kind of thought it's really important for us to know what a life group leader is. Who are the people that we want to be discipling our members of our church? And a life group leader is a special person because they've reached a point in their faith where they are no longer content to keep their faith to themselves. They want to pour out. They want to invest into other people. They want to come alongside other people and to help them grow and pursue this relationship with Christ. And so, for someone to do that, to be a lead discipler, as Phil talked about earlier, there's a couple of qualities that are just absolutely key for people to really be able to do that. And so that's what we have listed out here. And these are really simple, and you think that these would just be no-brainers, but we have to make sure we cover this because this defines who we are when we disciple people. And the first point is that life group leaders are committed to Jesus. And I'm not just saying that like life group leaders say that they're Christians and maybe come to church on a weekend, but like they are intentionally pursuing a relationship with the Lord. And you can see that in every single area of their lives. They're really intentional to foster that relationship with Him, to read Scripture on their own, to pray with their family, to come to church on a weekend and to worship and to foster that. And you can see that come into play through every element of their lives. It's not something that they set to the side of their life. It's influenced into all their relationships and their friendships and their jobs and their hobbies. Their commitment to Christ is a core part of their entire personhood. And then point number 2 is that life group leaders live exemplary lives. They're people of character. They're people who strive to be virtuous, and they strive to live according to the fruits of the Spirit. They're joyful, they're kind, and you can see that they have these lives of integrity. And that's not saying like you have to be like the most perfect person you can possibly be and that you have to have every single bit of your life together. Like that's not what we're saying, but we're saying that your relationship with Christ is at the point of consuming so much of who you are that your life and your actions and your words and your thoughts line up with that. Because we surely want those who are leading other people and discipling other people to be good examples and good moral examples for them as well. And finally, life group leaders love people. They're quick to love, and they're slow to judge. And being a life group leader means that you're going to have people in your group that may not be the easiest to love, or they're going to be difficult to come alongside and to try to really care for those people. But life group leaders are able to put all that aside and to focus on them and to listen to them and care for them. And just as I said earlier, the way how life group leaders love people is through coming alongside them, discipling them, and no longer keeping their faith to themselves, but pouring out to these other people so that they may also grow in the relationship with Christ. And so these are just 3 key essentials that are a core part to everything that we are as life group leaders, and we know that everyone here meets those qualities, and we're just so thrilled to have you guys here in this journey of ministering and discipling other people. So we're going to hand it back over to Phil, and we'll keep rolling.
All right, so thank you, Jake. And I want to say one thing, too, about that. I I found this strange phenomenon sometimes where, and I want to say this to you guys as, just as a pastor, where sometimes we tend to serve the church, serve God, in order to make up for or cover up for something else in our lives that needs to be fixed. And I just want to say, as much as we need life group leaders, I don't want that to be true of us. If there's something in your life that that God is asking you to change, it's easy to say, well, if I know that this isn't pleasing the Lord, but maybe if I do this, then that's okay. I've seen it happen, and it spells trouble for you and for your life group and for us and everybody. So please take to heart the things that Jake just taught us about what a life group leader is. Okay, so the next section is life group yearly rhythms. I'm actually going to skip that because I'm not 100% convinced this is what it's going to look like. We're still processing all that, okay? I do want to say a couple things. First of all, if you were in our training before last semester, you heard me talk about how, okay, in the fall, we're going to be the Alpine Inn, right? That's the restaurant out in West River that only serves one meal. I said, we're going to serve one meal, and we're going to do really well. And then in the spring semester, which is the one we're preparing for now, we're going to be the Minerva Salad Bar. That's where there's lots of really yummy options. So we just finished Alpine Inn. That was Roots. When we asked everybody, I said, give me one semester. And the reason we did that was because as we've been analyzing our church and our discipleship journey, and we took the big reveal study, we realized, and as we've grown so fast, it's hard to know that everybody has like some of the basics, of Christianity. We just needed to be able to say, hey, we've tackled this. We're going to continue to do it. We're going to continue to make these things a priority throughout all that we do. But we just needed to be able to say, hey, we've equipped our people to know these foundational things about the faith. And so I can't thank you guys enough for doing that. And I know that it's going to have a huge difference in our discipleship process. But I also want to talk about, before we move on, this thing that you've been hearing me say called a sermon study. Let me get a little bit of history about life groups at the Ransom. Most of you are familiar with what we call R3 groups. So I think it was 5 years ago, 2011 is when we got this building, right? So we bought this building in 2011. We had our first service here on Christmas Eve of 2011. Over the course of the next year, the Ransom Church tripled in size. We went from a church of around 300 to a church of around 1,000 in a year. And at the time, I think there was only 3 staff, me, Phil, and Lissa. And during that year, we hired Pastor Will Kalhoff on as our connections pastor. And at the time, I was the life groups pastor. And so as we're growing so quickly, we're saying to ourselves, how in the world are we going to have enough life groups for all these people that are coming to church? I mean, the life group is a priority for us. We think it's crucial to our mission. But we just don't have enough leaders. We don't have enough groups. Yesterday we were a church of 350. Now we're a church of 1,000, and we don't have enough groups. What are we going to do? So we came up with this idea to essentially make it easier to lead a life group. And we said, well, what if we gave people a DVD and we used the sermon as the basis for the life group, and we just asked them to play the DVD, and the DVD basically had a little Bible lesson on it based on the sermon, and then they just had some thoughtful questions that they could use to lead their group through. And as a result of doing that, we could say to people, hey, you can lead a life group, but we're not asking you to be a Bible teacher. We're just asking you to have a heart of hospitality. We're just asking you to love people, and we'll equip you to do some of these other things. And so that's where R3 groups were born. It stands for Rewind, Reflect, and React. And so then we hired Pastor Wandy. Some of you may remember Wandy, and he did life groups, and then Pastor Will did life groups, and now I'm back doing life groups. And one of the things that we've realized is that we have, over the years, we've kind of picked up a lot of insider jargon, okay? Like we name things in a way that isn't necessarily obvious to an outsider what it means. For example, the loop, right? So we're changing that to the care team. Well, the loop is where we, have services in nursing homes, in the jail, in the prison, where we go visit people who are in the hospital. We're just going to call it the care team. That hopefully comes a little bit closer, at least, to explaining what it does. Another example, the tour. I can't tell you how many times now I've had somebody ask me where the tour of the church starts. And so we're realizing that language isn't helpful for people. It takes another layer of interpretation, so we're changing that to Ransom 101, because at least that explains a little bit more what it is. It's an introductory class to the ransom. And then finally, R3 groups. I mean, you have no clue what that is when you hear what it is. I mean, you guys who have led the groups probably still don't always know what the R's are. And so we're changing that to sermon studies. It's basically the same concept. I'm going to probably tweak the format a little bit, trying to simplify it, trying to make it more clear and more user-friendly and easier and stuff like that, like a one-page kind of study guide, question guide. We're trying to figure out what the video portion that's going to look like in light of some other things that we got coming up. But nonetheless, sermon studies equal R3 groups for all practical purposes. So now you know what we meant by that. And thank you to everybody who signed up to do sermons today. We're really excited. So we did a survey that you saw for everybody who was in a life group, asking them some questions about how their life group went, which, by the way, the results have been overwhelmingly really positive. The ranking, I want to tell you guys this, we asked them to rank several things: your life group leader, how you bonded with your group members, the Roots curriculum, overall life group experience. Of those things we asked them to rank, the thing that got by far the best results was the life group leader. So that makes me extremely happy. And so all of it was good, but just wanted you guys to know that of all of those things, your life groups love you guys. So well done. So anyway, that's what sermon studies are going to be. Now let's move to page 5, life group leader responsibilities. And by the way, I've been talking a lot. We'll open it up for some questions at the end. Don't worry. Life group leader responsibilities. So during life group signups, I want to talk about your responsibilities. Your life group begins long before the first meeting. One of the most crucial times for developing a healthy culture is during the sign-up process. And at the ransom, this lasts for 4 or 5 weeks, and it's crucial that you maintain regular communication with your group to keep interest high, and that you communicate quickly and clearly whenever anyone signs up. Here are your responsibilities during signups. Number 1, when someone gets entered into your group in CCB, you'll receive an email. It'll probably come from one of us, me or Jake or Megan, or Nate. It's important that you follow up with that person within 24 hours, warmly welcome them to the group, and remind them of the details such as when and where you meet, and tell them that you are excited to have them there. So if you're a person who has an email address, but you only kind of check it like every couple days or once a week, you're not real active on your email, during life group signups, you need to change that. You need to be checking your email regularly, because it's really it's a strong value of ours that if somebody signs up for a group, that they hear from their leader promptly. Communication is so key. And number 2, send an email to your entire group at least once a week during signups. People can potentially sign up for your group in week 1, and then they have a whole month to wait before the first meeting. So during this time, life can get busy, people can forget, interest can wane. That's why regular and enthusiastic reminders are important during this time. So, keep the communication strong. Help people know, hey, we're coming. Here's the date. Here's the time. Excited to have you. So glad. Looking forward to meeting you if you haven't met them yet. We found that the best groups are the ones where the leaders communicate the most. So create a culture where people feel like they belong, and you won't be disappointed with the results. Okay, so life group signups this semester. Let me just give you a quick overview of what that's going to look like. Last semester, we had the paper signups. That was cool. It was a little bit of a nightmare behind the scenes for us. Me and Jake and Megan entered over 1,000 signups manually. And now our groups are more or less staying together from fall to spring. So we're expecting that most of your groups, by and large, will just kind of stay in the group. So they won't need to sign up again. And so signups are going to be online, like what we've done in the past. People just be able to jump on the website, and all the groups will be there, and there'll just be a form that they can click and fill out. It says, I want to join this group, and they type it in. And then we will email you when somebody says they want to join your group. We'll probably email you and CC the person and just say, hey, Joe has interest in joining your group. Can you follow up with Joe? And we'll put them in CC before you, okay, in your group. And while I'm on that topic, if there's somebody who you know is not coming back to your group, please keep your groups accurate as best you can. And in your appendix, CCB for Life Group Leaders, there's some instructions on how to add or delete people to your group in CCB. Okay, so hopefully you're equipped with that information. If you have any questions, let us know. All right, so that was life group signups, but during the semester, obviously the action happens during the semester itself. The biggest responsibility is to provide a warm, welcoming environment that is conducive to growth and community. However, there are a few logistical things that life group leaders are responsible for as well. Number one, taking attendance. And if you don't have the Life Group Leader app, maybe if you're a new leader, CCB's got an app for groups. It's called Small Group Leader. Please download that thing on your phone. And man, it makes things easier, not only for taking attendance, but for communicating with your group. You can just send an email right from your phone to your whole group and that sort of thing. And thank you to everybody who was faithful in taking attendance. It just has been really good for us to see what kind of retention rate we're running with our groups and stuff like that. So thank you. Number two, communicate with your group. We suggest at least one touch to your group as a whole each week. It's always a good idea to record prayer requests. You can do it through the Group Leader app mentioned above, and then email them out the next day so that your group can pray for one another. These weekly touches help keep morale high and your group feeling connected. Number three, help us provide pastoral care. I'm not going to read this to you. I'll just tell you, if there's an event in somebody's life, a death, a sickness, hospitalization, whatever, first of all, as the life group leader, I consider you to be their pastor. I would love for you as the life group leader to be in charge of seeing them go to the hospital and see them, or if they're having surgery, you and the group members take care of them, love on them. But if there's something that we as the church needs to know, maybe the care team needs to follow up, please let us know. You're kind of our first line of defense. You can email Pastor Jason and he'll be all over it. Number four, identify an apprentice leader. This is something that I really want to emphasize this semester. We just need to develop more leaders, and the best way to do that is through the groups. So right from the bat, right from the get-go, ask God, pray. Say, God, who's somebody in this group that you might be doing something in their heart and they might be able to be a good leader? And maybe within, by week 4 or something like that, you can approach them and say, hey, you ever thought about being a life group leader? Would you want to lead sometime? Just, hand that off to people as much as you can. And then by the end of the semester, maybe they'll be able to go out and lead their own group. So identify an apprentice leader and pour into them. And I'll be talking more about that in my weekly updates. But number 5, keep your group roster accurate. I guess I already talked about that. If somebody decides not to be in your group or someone new starts coming to your group, please add them to your group in CCB. There's instructions in the appendix. And the last thing that I want to talk about here before I ask Jake to come back up is kid-friendly groups. So you remember last year, last semester, we talked about how we're just realizing some major gaps in our security. And we want to do everything we can to protect you as life group leaders, to protect children most importantly, and of course to protect the ransom. And so we have these things that we're asking you, if you're doing a kid-friendly group, to do. I've done some research this last semester, just kind of find out what other churches do. It's really hard because it's hard to find another church that's larger that takes life groups as seriously as we do. Honestly, a lot of big churches just don't really care. They're just kind of like, sure, you guys can go do things, do whatever you want. We try to make it intentional. And so of the churches that I found that I think kind of do that, this sort of childcare policy is not unusual at all. And in fact, compared to some, it's not that high of a standard, which was a surprise to me. But anyway, what we're asking for kid-friendly groups is, number 1, a minimum of 2 people to supervise children. Number 2, a 10-to-1 child-to-supervisor ratio. Number 3, at least one of the child care helpers to be 18 or older. Number 4, the other one can be 13 years or older. And then number 5, if a child needs to go to the bathroom or needs a diaper change or something like that, we just ask that you ask the parent to do it. Okay. Now, what we did this semester in my group that works fantastic was we have a 13-year-old girl who's helping, and then the other person was just the parents in the group. We just kind of took turns rotating down. Nobody had a problem with it. I actually enjoyed it. As a leader, it gave me a chance to do something else. But one of the things that I'm trying to tell people is, if we're really honestly saying that life groups are intentional community, which is part of our definition of a life group, if we're saying that they're intentional community, then that means not just getting together and hanging out. That means taking responsibility for each other's kids, and as Americans, we're individualists, and we don't do this as well. But to be able to say, I have an interest not only in you and not only what I can get out of this group, but I want to love on your children too. I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think that'll just make our life groups healthier if we can come to that point. Other groups, of course, had different strategies. Some of them paid their child care workers and stuff like that because they didn't want to be down there with the kids or whatever. That's fine too. You can do whatever you want. But I think our group actually rather enjoyed the opportunity to do that for one another. And I got to know my friends' kids a little bit better, so that was cool. So that's it. So I'm going to ask Jake to come back up, and now here's going to be a little bit more interactive portion of the morning. So get your pens out, got some fill in the blanks. Jake's going to do a little bit of training for us.
Awesome. So just as Phil said, we're going to do a little bit of kind of more of a training portion. So we're going to talk about 8 essentials for leading a healthy life group. So you'll see that there's blanks and little keywords and like little spaces for you to take notes down there. And before we get started, maybe you're wondering, why is Jake holding a plant? Why does Jake have a plant? Well, let me tell you, just as Phil kind of said earlier, leading a life group is like gardening. That's your first point right there. Leading a life group is like gardening. At the end of the day, our primary job is to create the healthiest environments possible for people to grow in their relationship with Christ. That's through basically fostering those environments. It's very much like gardening. So kind of throughout this whole time, we're going to be using this metaphor and this illustration for gardening. And so just imagine your life group members as produce and vegetation, whether that's watermelons, tulips, sunflowers, Venus flytraps, whatever it is for your garden. I don't know what you garden. But just as we are called to be life group leaders, we are ultimately called to be gardeners. And so the first point that we're going to look at is really important because the rest of our points after this one are things that we can do. They're things that we can control. They're things that we can intentionally do to help cultivate these environments for people to grow. But this first one is something we can't ultimately control, and it's that you can't control the weather. You can't control the weather. Just as every gardener or every farmer knows, sometimes there are seasons where you can do everything you can possibly can. You can make sure the soil's great. You can make sure you plant all your seeds. You can make sure you go out there every single day to check on them. But if the weather is too hot and the weather's too dry and you don't get enough rain, or it's way too wet and it's just consistently pounding your plants, then your plants just aren't going to survive. And they may shrivel up and they may not end up being near as healthy as you wish they could be. And there's nothing you can do about that. And life groups kind of function the same way. Maybe some of us, or maybe a lot of us, have been in those life groups that have just been awesome, where it just seemed like all the weather conditions came together perfectly. Everyone connected right away. People were willing to share. People were growing together. Like, you could literally see how people grew through the course of the semester. And being a part of those groups are amazing. But then there's just some other seasons where maybe your group just didn't connect, and the weather conditions just weren't good, and there's nothing you could have done. Those conditions really could range from all sorts of things. It could be that maybe people just didn't connect with each other. Maybe people are too busy. Maybe the night was weird. Maybe they thought they were ready for a group like this, but realized it was beyond really what they were ready for. There's so many different things that can come together. And if you went through one of those instances where you were trying to lead a group, or maybe that might happen in the future, and you can honestly say you did everything you possibly could to steward this group and to foster this environment for people to grow in, then God will look at you and say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." And that's your key word here for this point, is faithfulness. Because at the end of the day, we can't control a lot of the conditions that people bring into these groups for why they may connect and why some groups work really well or why they don't. And so the best thing we can do, and the only thing we can do, is just to be faithful in what God is doing. And that all the stuff that we can't control and all those other forces, God has that all under control, and we just have to be faithful to what he's called us to do and what he's called us to be, and he'll work the rest of that out. So the rest of our points are going to be things that we can do by ourselves, things that we can control. And the second point is gardening requires intentionality. Gardening requires intentionality. Gardening isn't a one-and-done thing. Like, you can't just go out there, stick your seed in the ground, and call it good and just kind of assume it's going to work, right? Gardening requires that you're out there every single day. It requires you to go out there and water your plants and to pull the weeds and to trim the branches and to check the health of your plants. Like it's a dirty and grueling process. It's a lot of hard work that it just requires for you to consistently be out there checking in on the health of your plants. And it's the exact same thing with life groups. Christian community is messy. It's hard work. And it's not a one and done thing. It's not like people get loaded into your CCB group, you send an email, expect them to all show up, and then you're good to go. You know, it's not that one easy task that we would like it to be. And so the rest of our points here are going to be how we can intentionally foster that community. So that's your key word here, is just intentionality across the board. And there's a lot of different ways of how we can be intentional with our groups. So our third point, the first thing that we can intentionally do to create these environments for people to grow is you have to till the dirt. You have to till the dirt. One of the most important parts of gardening is tilling the dirt. The purpose of tilling is to mix the organic matter with the soil. It breaks up dry, crusted soil on top. It loosens up a lot of the other soil, and it just helps create the healthiest possible environment in the dirt for the seeds to grow. Because at the end of the day, you can't have healthy plants without healthy soil. You can't have healthy plants without healthy soil. And so people often think that successful life groups are determined by how good of curriculum you have or how good your discussion is. But that's just like saying the success of your life group or the success of your garden is determined by how good of tools you use. And that's just not good logic. And so we really do believe at the Ransom that one of the most important things we can do is to create the best environments possible for people to connect in and feel like they belong in, because from there, it doesn't matter what curriculum you do. People are going to discuss, and people will ultimately grow because that environment is healthy. So the key word here is hospitality. The key word is hospitality. And that is just a plethora of things. Just as Phil talked about earlier, it's communication a lot of times. It's sending out that email as soon as people get plugged into your groups. It's giving them that extra phone call. Or it's knowing their names before they even step into the door. It's being intentional with them. It's being warm and encouraging with them when maybe they share something hard. Or it's getting them connected with some other person in the group and fostering those relationships. It's so many things. And so when you think of hospitality, what's like the family that comes to mind that is just incredibly hospitable to you? Or the restaurant that you went to whose service was just top notch. And the reason why that service was so good is because they didn't just view you as someone they're working for, but they view you as a person who's valuable and wants to give you the best. And that's ultimately what we want to do, to invite people into these warm environments that they want to belong to. It's hospitality. Point number 4, fertilize the soil. You have to fertilize the soil. This is kind of a sub-point to tilling the dirt because fertilizing soil helps provide some extra nutrients for the soil and for the plants to grow extra healthy and everything. And you don't need to fertilize the soil, but it's really good that you do. And the connection to fertilizing the soil to fertilizing your life group, as weird as that sounds, is super simple. It's providing food. It's providing snacks, providing drinks. There's some really weird communal bonding power that comes in food. Like, there's a reason why we go out and have meals with people. There's a reason why we have family dinners. There's a reason why we want to eat in community. It's because it's just a social thing. And having that extra thing for people to munch on, it actually goes a long way. And it's something that's really simple, but is really, really important that we do. So whether that's maybe having a sign-up list for people to, sign up to take snack duty every other night, or even having maybe once a month or one time during the semester where you all gather together for some kind of a communal dinner is really, really cool, like a Friendsgiving or maybe a Friends Easter or like a Freester celebration is what I like to call it. Just a really cool way to celebrate and commune together. So number 5, is water your plants. Water your plants. The number one thing plants need to grow is water. I think we all clearly know that, and because again, it doesn't matter if all these other things are good. You can even have that really warm environment for plants to go, for the soil, but if you're not out there watering your plants, then they're just not gonna grow. And similarly, just as plants need water, our life group members need the living water, if you know what I'm talking about, if you see what I did there. Like, we all need the living water. We all need Jesus Christ. And at the end of the day, the key word for this point is discipleship. This is why we do what we do. It's discipleship through life groups involves so many things. It involves reading the Bible together. It includes discussing its truths together and having that conversation. It includes the curriculums we're going to study. Discipleship includes praying for each other during your group, but also outside of your group. It includes coming together for weekend worship, or maybe even worshiping there with your group. It includes serving with each other. It includes calling people up. It includes listening to people when they're going through those crazy crises in their lives, or whatever that looks like. At the end of the day, this is what it means for us to discuss and implement the practices, the principles, and the priorities of the Christian faith, so that way people can live like Christ and live free of sin. And that's why we value your guys' role as life group leaders so much. That's why we continually tell you how much we appreciate your role, because you are doing kingdom work to pour into these people and to help them grow in the relationship with Christ. But remember, just as plants need water, so does the gardener. Gardeners need water just as much as the plants do. And so that means that we need to make sure that we're fostering our relationship with the Lord as well. Because, man, we're going to be so much more ready to pour out to other people when we know that the Father is pouring into us, and we're spending that time with him in prayer and in Scripture and attending worship and being a core part of his church. It's crucial. Number 6 is trim the branches. You have to trim the branches. So once when your plants are growing and things are going really, really well for your garden, sometimes there's those plants and there's those trees that maybe the branches are getting a little too long, or they're looking a little wrangly. You know what I'm talking about? Or even maybe there's some unhealthy plants where bugs have been eating the leaves, and it's just not a very healthy plant. And so we trim the branches to hone in the plant to its ideal form factor, to control the plant. And so the key word here is discussion. It's facilitating discussion. And so, like, what the primary means of how we disciple people through life groups is ultimately discussion. And we all know, if you've led life groups before or have been a part of these groups, how rare it is for our discussions to actually stay on track with exactly how the curriculum is supposed to lay out. And so our role is kind of trying to facilitate that discussion and getting it honed in. So, for example, you could be talking about Genesis chapter 1 in creation, and you can have a great conversation for 20 minutes, and then somebody will say, you know, it's really weird that God made the platypus. And then someone else is like, yeah, it is really weird that God made the platypus. And then for the next 10 minutes, you're talking about how weird the platypus is, right? And so then it's your role as a life group leader to hone that conversation back in to its ideal form factor, back to the main point of God's faithfulness in creation. But just kind of another point with that, it's really important that we allow those like comical tangents to happen, because nobody can have a really deep, serious conversation for 45 minutes or 60 minutes without a breath of fresh air. Having a conversation about how weird the platypus is really can actually relieve a lot of that tension and a lot of that heavy conversation that we have. So let those funny moments happen. That's really crucial, as long as we still try to bring it back in and we know how to say, okay, that's been enough of that. Let's get it back to the core thing. Trimming the branches, honing conversation back to its ideal form factor, also includes talking with those people who always want to talk all the time, maybe just pulling them aside and having that conversation like, hey, let's create some extra space for some other people to have that conversation, and also calling out other people who typically don't tend to talk a lot. Because chances are they're actually listening and have incredible thoughts, and they won't share them unless somebody gives them the opportunity to. So that's really important for us to facilitate that discussion, to trim the branches. Point number 7, is pull the weeds. We have to pull the weeds. Weeds are the unwanted plants that come in and threaten the health of our plants. They try to steal all the extra good earth. They try to interfere with the water and all the extra nutrients that our plants want. And if you don't get in there, and if you're not on your hands and knees in the dirt pulling these weeds, sweating every ounce of sweat that you got trying to get these weeds out and putting your whole back into it, then it's only a matter of time before those plants overtake our vegetation. Those weeds overtake our plants. And just as also Phil talked about earlier, the key word for this is care. It's care. Because there's going to be a lot of weeds that come up in our life groups, members' lives. Things aren't going to go well with their job one week, or maybe something with their spouse has just been really complicated lately, or school has just been completely overwhelming for them, and they just need a safe place to process. And you guys are the first people who get to come into contact with that a lot of times. And so it's our responsibility to know how to pull these weeds and how to care for these people. And there may be some times where a really major crisis or a really major tragedy happens that we just aren't prepared for, and we're just not trained to adequately take care of those people. And so if something like that ever does happen, and in your best judgment, please get a hold of us. Get a hold of us as a pastoral staff, and we'll be sure to be there. We'll be sure to pray with you and to get you connected with the right resources and the right people, and we will do everything we can to help you out there. But if you find yourself in a moment where you have to care for somebody, it may be really overwhelming because, for one, you may feel like I didn't sign up to take care of these people's major problems. Like, this is just so beyond me. But at the same time, is the best thing we can do to care for people isn't to fix their problems, but just to be there, to be present with them, and to listen to them. Again, we're trying to create these healthy environments for people to grow, and the best way for that is just to be open, to hear them, and to pray with them, and to listen to them. Sometimes that's all people need to really feel like they're valued and that they can get through those weed moments in their lives. So that is crucial. And finally, point number 8 is plant new seeds. We have to plant new seeds. So as you may know, once when your plants are bearing fruit and you can take those off and those are ready to eat, if you get down to the center of that plant, there's a seed that you can replant in another garden for it to grow and start a whole new garden. And so this is discipleship at its finest, because discipleship should always be multiplying and it should always be reproducing. That's your key word here, is reproduce or multiply. Doesn't matter which word you really use, but the key point here, as Phil said, we really want to make it a point that we are pouring into a new leader or a new couple of leaders that can take our role, whether that's for next fall, maybe it takes a semester to develop them, maybe it takes a whole year to develop them, because we can't just keep ourselves as these little groups that become social clubs for Jesus and aren't willing to break out and to reach more people. So if we have about 50 groups right now, and everybody disciples and pulls up one leader, then, and assuming that everybody stays and that number is true, we'll have 100 total groups for next fall. And then if everybody does that again over the next year, we'll have 200, and then 400, and then 800. Like, it is just exponential what happens for the kingdom when people are intentional to invest in these other leaders. And it's something as simple as spending your first 2 weeks praying, God, who is somebody that we can pour into that you feel like is ready to lead a group? And then after 3 weeks, maybe you have that person and you pull them aside and say, hey, we really believe this in you. We see this in you. We want this to happen. And then you start having those conversations with them, give them opportunities to lead that discussion, and then help them grow, and then get them plugged in and send them out the tree, send them out the nest for them to fly on their own. And the kingdom impact with something as simple as that is so much greater than we will ever understand. So, and just kind of as I close here and before, are you coming up next? Awesome. And then before Phil comes back up next, it's just to, again, to affirm you guys and to encourage you guys. Life groups are hard. Life groups are messy because you are dealing and handling people. with real lives and real problems. And that's why we talk about how it takes such a special person, and your work does not go unnoticed, and your value to us as a church and as a staff, as a pastoral staff, and even to God is just so much more appreciated than you'll ever understand. So we are thrilled for another semester and for what God's going to do through you. And if there's ever anything we can do to best support you in this ministry, please let us know, and we'll make sure it happens. So let's go plant plants.
Sweet. Jake, that was awesome, man. High five, dude. Cool. Give Jake a round of applause. That was great. Thank you. We're just about done here. I'm going to ask Phil to come up just a second. And actually, Phil, you can grab Jake's handheld here. But just so you guys know, one of the things that I'm going to try to do during our sign-up process in January, my mantra is going to be, if you sign up, show up. You know, nothing makes me more frustrated on your guys' behalf than when people sign up for your groups and then either don't come or come once or twice and just disappear. On the one hand, we have to take responsibility, like everything rises and falls on leadership. But on the other hand, don't just do it because it seems cool in the moment. Do it because you're committing to something and you want to invest in this group. And so that's one of my prayers for this coming semester is that we have people who really mean it and that we can really go after it and dig in with whoever signs up. Okay. So last thing we're going to do today is Pastor Phil's going to come up here and he's going to share something kind of exciting with us.
So first of all, do you remember when we could all just go to church on Sunday and go and have our cup of coffee and listen to the sermon and go home? Wasn't that easy? Wasn't that so nice? And these guys keep making it harder and messier and better. So can we give Phil and Jake a hand just for pushing us? Yeah. Thanks a lot. I'm sitting back there talking with my wife going, maybe we're supposed to lead a life. Dang it. Okay. Yeah, we're going to do that too. So we're wrestling with it too. But I wanted to talk specifically about sermon studies in this coming semester. And if you're already leading a sermon study and you've already said, hey, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a sermon study. And this makes you go, ooh, maybe we don't want to do that. Too bad. You're in. If you're not leading a sermon study and it makes you go, I wonder if we should do that. The answer is yes, you should. Obviously, we're not trying to determine what you do. This is Minerva Salad Bar. You can choose whatever you want. In fact, there are several things coming up in connection with our series in January that are going to be challenging people to take an action step, and they'll have life groups associated with them. So we're going to need some topical groups and some different things like that. But as you know, or maybe you don't know, our South Campus opens January 8th. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. You probably have heard we have a West Campus in our future. And as I mentioned in the series a couple months ago, those things are not free. They cost money and stuff, and we've got to pay for that. And so we have, without any apology, said in the coming year, post-January, we're really going to be looking to do this generosity initiative where we can all get on board and get behind it financially. And in order to do that well, it has to be somewhat all-inclusive. It's got to be, you can't be taking the whole church on this track and then, and by the way, we need to, give money over here. It has to be a holistic part of what we do. In fact, I think it becomes an integrity issue if we try to, stay on this track and then say, and we got to be about money too. This isn't about money. This is about the vision of where Ransom Church is going. It's about reaching lost people. We are going to reach lost people with South Campus. There are going to be people that come to Christ in that building that would not have come to Christ otherwise. There are going to be people that attend church, people that get called to ministry, people that go on mission trips for the first time, that get involved in serving in ways they never have before, that start to tithe for the first time, watch God unleash generosity in them. And that's never going to have happened if we didn't do South Campus. And so I am a firm believer to the core of who I am that, when you think of reaching out, you think of giving money to, the banquet or doing a missions trip or whatever. I actually think our campuses are the most outwardly focused thing we're doing. I mean, any of you that have kids, you don't have a kid and go, wow, that made me a lot of money. You know, you don't have a kid and go, this is easy. I should, you know, have 4 more. You have a kid and you realize for that season of your life, you pour yourself out to better the future, right? And when you have more kids, it's because you're crazy, and we are crazy, and you know. So I remember, you know, we had 1 kid and it was, you know, 2-on-1. It was easy, and then we had 2 kids, and then at least we could, you know, play man to man, and then, you know, yeah, now we have Tucker, and it's zone all the time. It's just zone. We just best we can do, but you're crazy, but you're crazy because you so believe in that next generation, right? You so believe in pouring into the future. That's what campuses are. They cost money, and they are hard, and they are messy, and people go and you want to see them every Sunday, and you're like, wait, you know, when Cody tells me we got X number of 100 people now signed up for South Campus, I go, woo, and then I look at the list and I go, not them, I like that person, you know, and it gets personal and it gets real, but it's the most important thing that we're doing, and being that it's the most important thing that we're doing, we are not just going to. We're not going to do a fundraiser. That's not what we're doing. We're casting vision for the future about who we are as a church and where we're going, and that includes campuses. And that means in the new year, there's going to be a generosity initiative that goes all the way through Easter. There's going to be a sermon series that tracks with it. That is not a money series. It's not a giving series. It's not a generosity series. It's a vision series. It's going to talk about here's why we're doing what we're doing. Here's what it means to grow in this way. And here's how that includes generosity. But if we're doing that as a sermon series, guess what that means for sermon studies? That means that trickles down to you. And we did not want you who are leading sermon studies to go into sermon studies going, okay, we're going to lead a small group on whatever pastor preaches about. That'll be fun. And then get put in a situation where we're going to be challenging people in some of the areas. One of the areas they hold on to most is money, right? And so how are we going to have conversations that are about maturing my soul spiritual, that are spiritual conversations that lead to not only monetary, but including monetary means? We're not asking you to be fundraisers. We're not asking you to put you in a room and say, okay, so now you guys got to give X amount, we're all going to give this many dollars. We're not saying, okay, if we each, you know, give $50 and times this, it would be. We're not asking you to do that. We're asking you to journey with people to the deepest parts of their soul so they can grow in a way that leads them to a place where they can hear the voice of God, discern what he wants them to do, and follow through with it. And that will include people being challenged to go to West Campus. It will include more people being challenged to, you know, go to South Campus if that need be. It'll include South Campus being willing to think about sending people to West Campus and to other campuses. It'll include the mindset. We want to attack the mindset of how we think about reaching as many people as possible, the mindset of multiplication. And in order to do that, it will include a financial piece. And we just didn't want to put you in an awkward situation. So we're really, really excited. Obviously, we'd love as many people as possible to do sermon studies, simply because anytime we journey together, it's a good thing. But particularly in this season, it's going to be just so important to leave us in a place where you know, we're not trying to just raise money. We're trying to invest in the future of what God has called us to do, and we're trying to do it in a way. I personally believe, you know, we've been a church for 8 years, and we've seen some catalytic moments in our history. One of them was getting into this building. The growth that Phil just described, where we went from 300 to 1,000, happened when we got the space. There is something about a space. There's something about people having ownership of that space. And the church is not a building. It is not, you know, bricks and mortar. It is not. And yet this tool is one of the sharpest ones that we can offer. And so it's just, I mean, anybody who was part of Harrisburg campus can attest to that. How important it will be to have a place. To put it in perspective, we never saw Harrisburg campus. We saw it approach 200 several times. We've launched South Campus now. We're launching it in January, and we have a building to point to, and we have how many committed? 758 people committed to South Campus. Does that blow your mind? We've outgrown South Campus before we get there. To put it in perspective, we will be 2 services probably for a very short period of time, and then we'll be 4 services, and then we'll already be looking at what do we do when we outgrow this thing. That's the momentum you want in a church. That's how you launch. And that building is an incredible tool. But it's a tool towards what God is calling us to do. And so you guys get to be part, you get to help us on the front lines of helping people understand, Like if I had one goal for life group leaders, it would not be that you help us raise X amount of dollars. It would be that you help the people in your life group as we journey through this vision stuff understand that campusing is the most outreach oriented thing we're doing. It is going to make unbelievable kingdom impact. I wish it cost less than it does. It doesn't. It's just the world we live in, but it will have unbelievable kingdom impact. And we really, really believe that, or we wouldn't be chasing it. So I'm excited to have you guys journey with us. I think this season of, if we can move through this generosity initiative and it leaves us in a place where we can not only have launched South Campus, but launch West Campus on our timelines and have launched 3 campuses in a period, get to 3 campuses in a period of 18 months. I think that for us will be a catalytic tipping point of seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people come to Christ. I think it'll be a catalytic tipping point to leave us in a place not only momentum-wise, but financially, where we can then begin to do campuses and finances don't have to be a sticking point. We can just do what God's calling us to do. So if you guys can help us get there, you're going to help lead us through that charge. Does that make sense? So if you're doing sermon studies, please be excited about that. If you're doing a topical one and you're like, well, we were thinking about doing, this or that just to mix it up, but if you want us to do sermon studies, we will. We want you to do sermon studies. If you're doing a topical, that's fine, but just be paying attention and be asking Phil and Jake and these guys, how can we, in the midst of our topical study during that key 5 weeks, still be key influencers for the kingdom?